Protecting what matters most is the mission that matters most. At Lockheed Martin, we understand what's at stake. Out here, we understand that every piece of the joint domain puzzle has to fit together perfectly, so you can defend our shared values and protect the people who depend on you. That's why we've spent decades building and connecting the platforms you need to operate in every domain across air, land, sea, cyber, and space. We've created technologies that unite disparate and complex systems so you can sense, make sense, and act, protecting in the same moment you detect. But we don't just stop at the front lines. We help you operate in the harshest conditions to deliver aid and drive the agile innovation that pushes the limits of discovery. Everything we do is in service of what you do and why you do it. Your mission is a safer, more secure world. Our promise is to help make it happen.
Bună dimineața! Bine ați venit! Numele meu este COFTEREANU Liviu, sunt membru al Consiliului Științific al New Strategy Center, în prezent director științific la Institutul Național de Cercetări Aerospațiale și în viața fost comandant al Agenției de Cercetare pentru Tehnică și Tehnologii Militare. Sunt onorat să moderez panelul Defense Industry Cooperation in the context of the war in Ukraine, alături de 5 distinși paneliști, și anume doamna senator Nicoleta PAULIUC, domnul Justin CRUMP, doamna secretar de stat Daniela NICOLESCU, domnul Cyrille BRET și domnul Cristian SFICHI. În contextul războiului din Ucraina, dar și datorită pandemiei care ies pe sfârșite din punctul nostru de vedere, să sperăm pozitiv gândind, s-au creat o multitudine de schimbări de paradigme și de atitudini în viața de zi cu zi, paradigme pe care omenirea de-a lungul istoriei a demonstrat că este capabilă să le soluționeze.
The humankind has proved during its history its capacity to adapt to various such shifts in paradigm to find innovative solutions in order to go beyond. We can go beyond such crises in two kinds of ways, either through war or through technological development. So we need to coalesce around this second solution. The main ideas of this panel are focused on the progress that the EU needs to achieve in order to acquire modern defense capabilities, the way that the burden will be shared between the EU and NATO, the way that the lessons learned from the Ukrainian world will influence NATO's priority in the defense budget, and the increase of the Romanian defense budget to 2.5%. So this will allow us to purchase weapons, and what are the possibilities of the defense industry in Romania. So here you have this brief introduction to this panel. Allow me now to introduce the first panelist, Senator Nicoleta PAULIUC. Mrs. Pauliuc is at her second mandate in Ilfov. Starting in 2020, she became the chair of the Committee on Defense and National Security of the Senate. She's been a lawyer and member of the Bucharest Bar from 2006. In 2012, she created her own law firm. Between 2018 and 2020, she's been the president of the Legal Committee, Discipline and Immunity Committee within the Romanian Senate. Senator, you have the floor. Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I would like to also thank New Strategy Center for having invited me here today to speak about a topic which is, in my opinion, of a crucial importance in this security context. After the Second World War, Winston Churchill was speaking about the need for the nations of Europe, between whom rivers of blood have flowed, to forget the feuds of 1,000 years war and to work together in order to achieve a harmonious future. This is an important message to maintain cohesion and to have cooperation between Western democracies. Romania is a part of that, and these are the primary conclusions in order to protect our future in these troubled times, especially in the context where the preferred strategy of the enemy of peace on this continent seems to be divide et impera. This unity has a threefold meaning. On the one side, it means for all European countries, no matter their dependency on Moscow, to reject individual survival strategies. In order to be protected as a whole, Europe needs to adopt a single voice, a single stance. Secondly, those European countries who are in the vicinity of the conflict needs to be supported consistently in order to manage this humanitarian crisis, because they have been strongly impacted by this aggressive war. The strength of Europe will be shown by the strength of its weakest link, and solidarity is an essential principle in our current times. And last but not least, we need a solid collaboration in the field of defense between those states who have adopted the values of the Western liberal democracy. And here, besides other important decisions taken by the political environment, I'm speaking here about the increase of the defense budget to 2.5%. We also need the support of big industry, the big defense companies. So I'm happy to see you all here. We shouldn't hide behind words. The Russians have not only invaded Ukraine, they have turned against the founding principles of the EU. Therefore, the EU member states' reaction is essential in order to to think about a post-war construction, mutual confidence, united action, interdependency and solidarity. These are essential elements to our resilience. So we are crossing a huge crisis, such as Europe has never known over the last 75 years. We didn't believe it was possible, and to be honest, we were not ready for it. However, crises are always windows of opportunity as well. It depends on us to go beyond this moment, so we can go out of this crisis stronger, more united as well, closer together. Otherwise, Euroscepticism will be even more rooted. As George Friedman was saying in one of his analyses on Eastern Europe, Romania has always been a stability factor on the eastern border of EU and NATO. We've seen President Iohannis's and Mr. Ciuca's government tenacious actions. We have managed to show that we are a responsible partner, a trustworthy one, capable to manage various crises. I'm speaking here about the refugee crisis. And sometimes we've fared even better than countries who have been older member states. Another element which is essential to my opinion for the protection of Europe is the military security. The war has shown us that ideas such as the European army are not feasible solutions in the long run. Therefore, our main political and military alliance, NATO, that is, needs to be reinforced because this is the shield that protects Europe first and foremost. We fully understand the need to strengthen the eastern flank of NATO against any possible aggression or provocation. Of course, this needs to be paired with an increase of the military capabilities of the alliance, including from the perspective of the Black Sea security. And this was one of the desideratums of the Madrid summit. I am convinced that even in such troubled times, we have all the reasons to believe that all European states understand the necessity to increase the defense budgets. Not only because the EU member states' armies need to be modernized, but also because Europe's strategic interests include and go beyond the current Ukrainian war. So Europe enters an era of strategic competition. That is why we need to invest in military capabilities in order to be able to respond to the Russian, Chinese or other states' provocation. Europe has to invest in its technological, scientific and industrial base in order to make sure that it has the necessary military equipment in order to defend its own interests. Supposing now that Europe will invest more in the defense field. The next point to address on the agenda is the way that this money, this extra money, will be spent. Of course, part of it will go to covering essential expenses.
În plus, cred eu că este și nerealist să ne așteptăm ca guvernele să mărească cheltuielile naționale de apărare.
We shouldn't expect for this national funds to be exclusively invested in European collaboration solutions. It is unrealistic to expect for European governments to increase their national budgets for the field of defense and not wish for this money to go towards their own defense companies. That is why I have taken this mission to navigate these troubled waters of a public and parliamentary debate with regard to changing legislation relative to the military procurement. The targets I have set are, for example, to strengthen national security, to focus on economic reasons, such as yearly investments that I estimate as over 1.5 billion euro going to the Romanian arms industry. I also believe that we need a law that is capable to lead to a rebirth of our defense industry. There are social and economic reasons as well, that is the possibility to generate a couple of thousand new jobs, creating also a modern and efficient legislative framework, and we need a dedicated law for that, and we need to be open to economic competition. The aggression war launched by the Russian Federation against Ukraine is showing us that Romania needs to speed up the endowment process of the Romanian army, and it shows us that we also need an increased security. Coming back to NATO, I could say that the NATO's huge cooperation umbrella allows for any kind of cooperation. This is a positive thing. Of course, we need a world where peace and freedom rule, a world presenting a prosperity framework for our nations, as we have witnessed after and in the Second World War. It's the US and Europe united which represented the best alliance when faced with irrational tyrannies. Romania is one of the EU countries which has took open steps in order to strengthen its strategic partnership with the US. It is important for Europe as a whole to understand that in this ever more globalized world where we are linked through invisible threads, the United States are our friends and partners going through history. I cannot close my presentation without underlining the fact that we have each our own role to play, and we need to consider the big picture as a whole. So Romania is a NATO and EU member state, is part of, is a will in this bigger clock, and we have proved everyone that they can rely on us. Thank you, Senator, for your speech, quite in line with our panel's theme. I was impressed by what you said. It's important that you and the members of the Senate are intent on solving the current crisis. Thank you very much.
And the following speaker is Mr. Justin CRUMP, founder and CEO of CIBER.
Este veteran militar cu o vechime de aproximativ 27 de ani. Este absolvent al Colegiului de Comandă și Stat Major din Britania.
From the British Armed Forces College. He graduated from King's College in London, Durham University, so he has wide expertise in this field.
Senator, thank you again for I think that very valuable political context, and you've stolen many of my points, but so I'll try not to repeat what you have just heard, but add some more depth. So my background is as a specialist in intelligence, in risk intelligence in particular, and trying to understand the world. And I've been accused of being very gloomy and very sad over many years. I'm now happy because all my sad predictions have come true, I suppose, or I should be happy. I'm not, because obviously the world is an increasingly challenging place, and I would echo many of your sentiments that I think we have had, sadly, the very best of times. I think the times, certainly for Europe, here, of course, the UK, for the United States, I think the times from 1990 to 2020 were actually, sadly, the best we're going to have. And we've been able to enjoy that era, but of course we've become complacent, I think, during that period of time. And I think even a year ago, having the discussions at a forum like this, we'd have been looking at very different topics. And I'll come back again at the end to NATO, but I think one of the things we'd have been discussing is, is there a point to NATO? That was something we always used to discuss. I don't think we're discussing that at this conference. You know, so, but we were in this strange period of time. But the reality is the world has been getting more and more complex. We've been able to hide it. We've been able to ignore it. We've had other political imperatives that have allowed us to deprioritize defense, and we took risk on defense. It was an issue that happened a long way away for most of us, particularly in Europe. It was something that, you know, maybe in our minds was belonging in the Middle East or South Asia, you know, these other zones, but it wasn't something that would affect us, and it has. And I think the sad thing is, I find what's happened with Ukraine is a shocking event. I do not think it is a surprising event. I do not think that we in this room should have been surprised. And I will be fair, though, that whenever I have travelled to this part of the world, everyone I have spoken to has said to me, there are problems coming from Russia, and I've heard that for 20 years, and it's been a constant message. So we should not have been surprised. We should be shocked. It is a shocking event. It is a horrible event, but it was always coming. We would have conferences and discuss what was coming. We sit and we discuss China and Taiwan, but it's become academic. And I think the big lesson of this is these threats are real and they will disrupt our lives, and we are not used to that. You know, our children are certainly not used to that. I think the older generation, yes, remembers, but 30 years is a long time. It is beyond most people's military service. Most people in the UK do 22 years, so they've had entire careers of the best of times in many ways. Not to denigrate Iraq, Afghanistan operations we've done, but again, we haven't faced this sort of a threat. So it is a seismic change to us, but we should have been prepared. And I think when you look at this, we have this very complex global system. There are emerging threats. There are threats that are being driven by climate change. The other panel happening right now is on climate change. We are seeing some of the effects of that already. It's only going to get worse, and it is driving factors on this planet that will fundamentally threaten how we live. Whether or not you believe in it, I can tell you that's what's going to happen. There will be migration. We are going to find that areas that we have lived in will no longer be livable. We'll be living in new areas. We'll be living in new ways. There'll be huge challenges to sustainability. And that's the natural environment. And I'm afraid that situation is only getting worse because of this conflict. It is putting back global efforts, along with COVID, global efforts to make the world a more unified, better place. And I think what we have also seen as part of this is the breakdown of the international order at the highest level, and a breakdown of faith in some international institutions, not all, sponsored by NATO. It's good. But many other things, you know, the trust in the UN, I would say, is much lower. I don't think we can deny that. The world did not react well together to solve COVID as one planet. We were challenged by climate change already. We're certainly not going to deal with that now at a time when an energy crisis and things like that mean that prioritization of those issues is gone. That means we will have a harder world in the future. And that will obviously drive the need for defense. And behind all of this, there was a failure of deterrence that I think came from our lack of imagination that this could happen. And there's a strong lesson there for defense. And it comes down to the fact that I think we were lucky that the Russians embarked on the wrong mission and had the wrong mindset, and that they did not succeed. If you think back to how we felt on the 24th of February, it could have been very different. I think if you thought of the fears one might have about where would this stop. And it's interesting at this conference that I think we're almost talking about the war in Ukraine in the past tense now, because the front lines have largely stagnated. We think we know how it's going to go. I'll remind us again that we don't know where it's going to go. Russia has some other things it can do. This conflict can escalate. I think we've got used now to the idea it won't. We're sending weapons, nothing happens. This can still escalate in the next few months. And so that is an urgent context. And I do feel actually that complacency has once again set in. And to be fair, we are very distracted politically in many countries. It's not a coincidence that our adversaries have promoted that problem set that we have. But we're distracted politically, we're distracted by COVID, we're distracted by economies, you know, we're being damaged by energy security that affects the way we're going to live straight away. We're already feeling that. And our adversaries, again, will exploit that situation. So we are already in a point where complacency is challenging us again, that we're not learning, I would argue, fast enough. We talk about rearmament, but the money isn't coming in every country. There are, of course, other priorities. I am not seeing an urgency that you might have seen, say, in 1939, in 1940, that we did see in the UK in 1938. That doesn't mean something is inevitable, but we nearly had a much worse crisis. We still could, and I think we haven't got over that complacent mindset. And that means rapidity, it means being quick, it means developing ideas fast. We don't have time. I think we can't take that for granted. We've had 20 years where we could take risk in defence, we could think about the far future. It was theoretical, defence was not a priority. I don't think any of us would agree that was true. And maybe many of us did not agree that that's what we should have done back in the time. So in all this, I mean, I'm happy to take questions later on particular tactical points, if people want to talk about which weapon systems are winners or losers in this conflict. I think fundamentally, though, we don't know whether this is the last conflict of the 20th century, you know, or the first big conflict of the 21st century. And I think you see that in the way that people are trying to understand the lessons of Ukraine. And you have some people arguing, for example, that this shows that with 5 special forces and 4 drones and cyber capabilities, you can win a war. A few guided missiles and you can take out the entire Russian army. At the other end, you have people saying this absolutely shows why you need large-scale armoured capabilities on the battlefield. This is why you need hundreds of thousands of infantry. And I'll be fair that where the Russians are really failing is they don't have basic infantry. They've got lots of vehicles. They've got lots of crews. I mean, less than they had, but lots of crews. They don't have people in the back. And that is holding them up again and again. So you have 2 already massively differing views. The tank is dead. one side. On the other side, it absolutely isn't. You just need to use it slightly more carefully, but its role exists. So this dichotomy is something we still haven't sorted out. And I think we need to, unfortunately, pick a side in what we're doing. I would certainly argue, though, that war is essentially unchanging. The basic concepts of warfare are very, very similar. The basic things we are seeing in Ukraine are very similar. Technology sped it up. Technology's made it harder to hide. You have to employ deception to a much higher level because you might be being watched by a UAV. So you have to employ camouflage. You have to use decoys. These are not new ideas. We're just having to get better at old ideas. For NATO, of course, the challenge has been air defense. We've never had to really think about not having control of the air, but now we're looking at the fact that actually that can happen. Missile defense, which we haven't quite prioritized enough. So there are some rapid areas of development that we're learning, but again, there is a risk that we don't agree at all on whether the priority should be super high tech, small forces, super agile, or do we need mass? Do we need a return to the 1980s? The answer will be some of all of it, I'm sure, but I think, again, the lesson here is we can't ignore mass. And so that has some final points I'd want to leave you with about what we need from defense industry. I think it's solutions that are scalable. We have to have something. You can't buy 10 of something, have no more of it, not be able to make more of it. It must be scalable, whatever we do, I think. It must be something that we can ramp up, we can build efficiently. And the second thing is it must be suitable. And obviously we have to work out what that means, but the thing I would leave you with there is what we have learned is equipment you can use gives you a capability. A super complicated item of equipment that's unusable is not a capability. It's a really, really interesting concept, potentially, but it's not a capability. And then the final point is that whatever we do must be sustainable. And I think that ties into where we put it in terms of nations. Do we share development? We're learning the constraints of that. Do you need a national industrial base? And to be fair, these are questions that all companies are asking. You know, is our supply chain secure? Do we need to bring our supply chain into our countries? It's no different for defense, of course. But again, the final thing I'll leave you with, a year ago, we'd have been sitting talking about NATO a few weeks after the evacuation of Kabul. And I think we would have been saying this is 30 years of not really knowing what the mission of NATO is and a big movement against it. It shows how quickly things change a year later. I said we are very, very clear, I think, on the benefit NATO offers, to the point that Finland and Sweden are joining, and it has served its purpose. Russia has not come after any country in NATO, and I think that is notable. Obviously, we now have to think about the grey zone, and we have to think about those other challenges, but if nothing else, I think it shows that key point, that NATO works. It was here for a purpose. We could ignore it for 30 years. It's more maybe in the UK, obviously, than here. It's back, and it's great to be part of that, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Justin, for your very interesting presentation. You mentioned, in your opinion, the Ukraine war is the last war to the 20th century and the first to the 21st century. Yeah. In my opinion, if we want to be resilient, we have to solve the energy crisis, and after that we solve everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Următorul speaker este doamna secretar de stat Daniela Nicolescu,
Daniela,
secretar de stat în cadrul Ministerului Economiei din 2019 și este coordonatorul Industriei Naționale de Apărare, Resurse Minerale Neenergetice, șef al structurii de securitate al Ministerului și reprezintă Ministerul Economiei în raport cu Parlamentul și societatea
with the civil society and the parliament. She is a graduate from the Economic Studies Academy in Bucharest. Mrs. State Secretary, you have the floor.
Bună ziua! Vă mulțumesc pentru onoarea de a mă afla astăzi aici și de a prezenta cum se pregătește industria națională de apărare în contextul actual. Totdeauna marile teme au nevoie de consens politic și național și atunci noi vrem discursul meu va fi mai pozitiv, așa cum a fost și discursul colegei mele, pentru că știu că la ora actuală, la nivelul guvernului, la nivelul Ministerului Economiei se fac eforturi și eu zic că se fac eforturi care au și rezultate pentru a ne pregăti așa cum trebuie în actualul context. Este fără echivoc industria de apărare atât cea în care statul nu este acționar majoritar, respectiv 20 de companii, cât și cea privată, 180 de companii, reprezintă un subiect pe care consider că trebuie să existe un consens politic și național în vederea implementării unei strategii pe termen mediu și lung care să fie asumată de întreg spectrul politic și implementată indiferent de guvernele care se succed la putere. Și așa este pentru că eu sunt politic liberală, iar ministrul economiei este politic PSD. Nu contează, e strategie pentru România, nu pentru un partid sau altul. Invadarea Ucrainei de către forțele Federației Ruse a generat schimbări cu efecte pe termen foarte lung într-o reașezare mondială greu de anticipat înainte de izbucnirea conflictului în plan politic și economic. În vremuri normale, Uniunea Europeană nu și-a trecut problema decuplării de importurile de energie.
Normally, no state in Europe would have considered disconnecting from the Russian gas supply, but the war ended that era, and Germany changed its viewpoint, and it will give up imports of gas from Russia. And while trying to find new energy sources, the Russian gas will lose its upper hand and won't be used as a weapon in the future. This shows that we need a change in paradigm. So new energy hubs will appear, new economic developments will appear, and economy is everything because the war in Ukraine changed our priorities, and difficult decisions were taken in a matter of weeks, and this will shape the geopolitics of our continent for years to come.
Care poate compensa lipsa de efective și experiența trupelor, însă prezența capabilităților
the presence of striking capabilities at one of the belligerent parties will make the other party weaker and weaker. The Russian strikes made Ukraine lose part of its production capacities. But the calls for support from Ukraine to Western countries many a times remained unanswered because there is a gap of functional interoperability, but maintenance of the equipment was possible by sending specialists and also instructions on how to maintain performant technologies to serve its goals. We have general objectives of the European Commission for the member states' defense ministries, so consortiums can be set up in order to apply for EU funding, and Romania is part of these consortiums. So financing boosting the R&D through clusters of excellence is essential to be part of the global chain of technologies. By integrating the digitalization and eco-innovation and novel technologies will boost our defense capacities, and it will maintain a low budgetary deficit. But these are major challenges for our countries on the medium term. These challenges need to be tackled, and we need to boost our expenses for the defense ministry. In this context, it is highly important to have a modern army able to use performant technology and capabilities. 1.4 billion euros every year allocated for defense expenses and boosting 2% of the GDP to 2.5% of the GDP to be spent on our defense will help us have good maintenance services and good stock for our armies. Considering the current context and the additional allocations, we should focus on procurement to satisfy our national security needs and the endowment with ammunition, because we support universal values such as country sovereignty and independence and freedom. So we need to secure the national security, sovereignty and independence and freedom of our country and our partners. The same law that regulates the functioning of the national defense system has in mind connects operations to protect our national interests for defense and security interests. Together with Mrs. Nicoleta Pauliuc and our colleagues in the line ministries, we worked on amending Law 232 in order to bring it up to date. It needed several amendments, and our Ministry of Economy and the Defense Ministry and other relevant services, such as intelligence services, wanted it to be amended because it protects our interests through capacities of the national defense industry. Our production capacities to produce weaponry and weapon systems and testing models such as components that are high-tech, to allow us for a better surveillance and better cybernetic capacities. Also factories and manufacturing facilities for biological weapons, and our collaboration with the Ministry of Research, where my colleague Tianu is minister right now, will help us develop new projects and boost our capacities for maintenance. So, starting from the fundamental interests our country has on the long term, we want to restart our capacities to manufacture optimal solutions, technological solutions, and new generation weaponry. For example, the Făgăraș manufacturing facility has been supported to revamp its production, and they will also provide us with reports that will help us make the best decisions when it comes to projects. So we will also join two factories in order to have powder production, because without such powder you can't manufacture ammunition and answer the needs of a country's army. This is why I am glad to be part of this government, a government that revamped the production of these factories. We also encourage collaboration between research companies and our factories, and also the Cugir factory will boost its production capacities. We will secure the supply chain for raw materials for that factory, and 120 million euros will be allocated for Cugir factory for its contracts in the following 5 years. So the shape and content of our security strategy has been established in order to acquire new communication systems for our troops, and we will have a special tender to allow for light armored vehicles to be procured. GDS Moldov is a company we signed a contract with for Piranha 5 armored vehicles to be produced in Romania. Also, maintenance contracts were signed, and these are just a few of our accomplishments. By telling you that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I hope we'll meet again soon.
Mulțumesc frumos, mulțumim frumos, doamna secretar de stat.
Thank you, State Secretary. A lot of new initiatives in the ministry's activity. So may God help you and give you strength so that you can finalize all that. So I have noted that there's an aim to increase Romanian capabilities, and of course this will be done thanks to our cooperation cooperation with our foreign partners within the EU and NATO. And this will finally strengthen the Romanian state. Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Cyrille BRET, professor with the Sciences Po University in Paris. He is the main auditor of the French inspection of the administration. He is a graduate of Social Sciences University and has a master in sociology in the Sciences Po University in Paris. Mr. BRET, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Colonel COFTEREANU. I will speak in capacity of the director of the subsidiary of Naval Group in Athens for the region. War is about courage of the soldiers, that's for sure. It's about the resilience and the mobilization of the population. It's been obvious in the case of the Ukraine war. War is about, of course, the persistence of the authorities, but to us, to the defense companies, it was a reminder that war is about industrial resilience, about the organization of the defense industries. If you are deprived of industrial defense capacities, you are weak, you are vulnerable, you are at risk. But if you build in the long run an industrial base, now you can be in a better position in order to ensure your national security. It's obvious, but it has to be reminded. And to us, to the defense companies, it's just a reminder. We know that what is at stake in industry, in R&D, in job creation, it's national security as well. Of course, wars are won or lost on the battlefield, on the front line, but also in the long run, in the big cities, the big factories a country has or has not. It might be paradoxical for a state-owned national industrial company such as Naval Group, who is focused on national defense and first and foremost to the Marine Nationale, the French Navy. It might seem paradoxical to have a long-standing strategy in industrial cooperation throughout the world. It might seem, but it's not. It's not because it's been part of our project throughout the last decades. Of course, the priority of every national state-owned company is first and foremost the national defense of the state. But throughout the last decades, we have put in place a real and long-standing industrial cooperation strategy because it's in the interest of our customers, it's in the interest as well of our own company. Up to now, I mean, before the war in Ukraine, the industrial cooperation strategy was threefold. First, it was crucial to have allies inside the industrial base in the country we are focusing on. It was of vital importance to have support. For example, for a country I know quite well, Greece, it was vital before the signature of the strategic partnership to have companies who were vocal about the merits of the product and the merits of the partnership between the company and the state. In the second phase, once the contract is signed and when the hard work begins, it was crucial to show that the efforts of the states and the efforts in the Naval program are huge. I mean, it's a large sum, it's a large share of the GDP that is dedicated to such programs. It was of the utmost importance to show that there is a return for the state, of course, a return for the companies, that's obvious, but a return for the new students that just graduated from the academies, from the universities, that jobs are looming, that jobs are real, are there. And it's been the case, for example, in Singapore, where Naval Group set up an R&D center in order to benefit from all the talents, from all the expertise, from all the marvelous capacities that the students, the engineers, the managers at the local stage have. And therefore, it was at that stage, it was a marvelous input, contribution from the international market to the strength of our national company. And of course, industrial cooperation is also a major asset to a company such as mine, a major asset in order to build a long-standing confidence, a long-standing cooperation with the many countries. For example, in Chile for the submarines, or in Egypt, the partnership goes way beyond only a sale of products. It's now the question of being part of an ecosystem, and hence to be, to a certain extent, of course, responsible for the national security of the countries at stake in the long run. So it was, if I may say, before war in Ukraine, and in that respect, Naval Group is really happy to be part of the national security ecosystems throughout the world, far beyond the borders of France and the factories in France. So now for the as for the war in Ukraine and the impact it has on the way we might see the future of industrial cooperation. I might sound arrogant, but it was not a shift to us. It was really the unfortunate occasion to be reminded of some fundamental truth. Without a very strong, locally based supply chain, you cannot win a war. You cannot protect your own borders. And this is now evident, and Colonel, you reminded us of the fact that we went through two major crises, not only the war in Ukraine, but also COVID crisis. And all the companies had to rethink the way they wanted to shape their supply chain, because we had shortages, we had delays, we had probably as well inflation, and now inflation is here, and it struck all the countries throughout European Union and NATO. So we had to reshape the way we wanted to ensure that at the right time, at the right standard of quality, and at the right price, the states we are building partnership with are supplied with the equipment they need, they deserve, and maybe they will use. So to us, it was a spur in order to reorganize the supply chain, and industrial cooperation had a slight change. Now, what is at stake is the resilience of our supply chain. On the ground, I mean, on the local, you cannot supply a battlefield that is located, for example, in Ukraine. You cannot supply it from the other part of the world. You have to have factories, you have to have suppliers on the ground, near the front line. So to us, it's very important now to have a local approach of the industrial cooperation, to strengthen even more the dialogue with all the shareholders of national security. Of course, the state administration. This is very important, and it's been said by both Chair PAULIUC and State Secretary Nicolescu. The question is money, because the money is not a question of budget, it's the price a population is ready to pay to ensure its national security. And each and every European country now knows that the price is inevitably high. The second aspect is that now we are no longer considering industrial cooperation as a nice to have. It's inevitable, because this is the national resistance that is at stake in that respect. And of course, in all the countries we are involved in, either for commercial campaigns or in order to materialize the program, both for surface ships and for submarines, what is at stake is to have a contribution to this strategic partnership that goes far beyond the company. The strategic partnership, the bilateral strategic partnerships between France and the country at stake. And I must say that without the support of the French embassies, without the support of the French ministries, without the contribution of the soldiers, of the French soldiers on the ground, and it's the case in Romania, of course, we couldn't have such level of credibility in the way we address industrial cooperation. In other words, industrial cooperation is just one of the many aspects of the strategic partnership France is building throughout the world in order to, of course, protect the national French interest, but also the national interest of the countries that are allies of France. So now to the last words I would say about that. Yes, of course, war in Ukraine was a shock, as you said. But war in Ukraine should be, I think, for all the European defense companies, big or small, French or not French, is just a reminder that you cannot build your national security overnight. You cannot build it even in a year or two. You have to build it right now for the decades to come. And that's why my company sees it in the very long run. Very long run. You have to be persistent. I will take the example of Greece. We started to work with the Greek government even before the crisis. We've been working with the Greek government for 15 years now, without any contract, without any short-term success, but we've been persistent in the way we offer the government solutions to ensure sovereignty, and we've been persistent in the way we offer solutions to the local companies in order to strengthen the national defense of the country. In Greece it has materialized last year, but it was the byproduct and the fruit of a very long-standing strategy, of a long-standing dialogue, because, and this would be my last word on that, you cannot build national industrial defense in a short period. It has to be a long-standing partnership, because this is all about reliability in the long run. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, sir, for your very interesting presentation. In my opinion, the supply chain is very important, and is very important part of the life cycle cost of the products. And you mentioned a very important idea. We have to build not only for this moment, we have to build for many years until now. Thank you, sir. Următorul speaker și ultimul.
The next and last speaker of this panel is Mr. Cristian Sibylline, country director of Thales Romania, the graduate of the physics faculty, the nuclear department, and member of Royal Defense Academy.
Cristian, te rog.
Cristian, you have the floor.
Mulțumesc foarte mult, domnule colonel. Mulțumesc
Thank you, Colonel.
New Strategy Center pentru invitația de a
I'd like to
participa
thank
în
New Strategy Center for inviting me to take part in this
colegi
panel.
distinși din mediul politic,
alongside distinguished colleagues coming from the political and economic fields, both from within and abroad. So, working for Thales, I am part of the Romanian defense industry ecosystem. We started collaborating with New Strategy Center from the very first days of their existence, and we've taken part in all their events in order to contribute to the rebirth of the defense environment. When you are the last to speak, it's always more difficult because you feel like you have to rehash the same ideas that were already expressed by the previous speakers. But those who forget their past are condemned to relive it. George Santayana said that. My role is to create a link between the theoretical and more ministerial side of things to the practical application. Mrs. PAULIUC and Mrs. NICOLESCU and the legislator, I should very much like to believe they will consider us as a partner. We hire over 1,000 engineers, software experts. We are therefore part of the ecosystem, and we do want to stand by you in strengthening our national security interests. Within the Ukrainian war context, we've been reminded of a concept that is the localization of the armament production, which leads to the resiliency of a nation in case of aggression. This is not a new concept. Whenever there is a new crisis, we are being reminded of it. The most recent such example, and I think my colleagues present here already mentioned it, it's the COVID-19 pandemic and the lack of national capabilities to manufacture a vaccine. So the question was asked then, why do we not have the capacity to produce it locally? Now, I'd like to showcase a few things that we are doing in our company. Being so close to this conflict area in Ukraine made Romanian authorities to increase the defense budget. It was 1.4% initially, it got to 2%, and starting in 2023 it will be at 2.5% of our GDP. In real terms, for military procurement, it would represent 1.5 billion euros spent on an yearly basis. As an aside, I'd like to remind you that this political consensus was signed on the 13th of January 2015 by all political parties. Therefore, it's been 7 years that Romania has spent 2% of its GDP for defense. It would be now interesting to see, to take stock and to see if we manage to increase the projects in national defense industry. So, as a NATO member state, we've taken commitments to align with international legislation. As a member of the EU, we need to align with European legislation, and of course we want to have strategic autonomy. Some discuss about Article 346 from the European treaties, then about the European Directive 81, Directive of 2009 for military procurements. Of course, they allow for exceptions from the general rule. For example, for the supply chain security, intelligence security, and government-to-government contracts. So these exceptions most often act as a two-sided blade. Of course, they allow for developing strategic national or European autonomy, which can also be attained by supporting localizations and by the shortening of the supply chain. As we stand now, there are no exceptional measures encouraging investments Romanian or foreign investments in the Romanian defense and security industry. If I may, this would be a kind of wild card for those who come to invest in your country. So we should give them some sort of incentive. But such incentive does not exist right now, which only allows for limited local developments. So we started in 2015 with 2%, but we've seen few significant developments. I will now present a few projects that we developed, very spearheading technologies, stationary geosatellites, meteorological satellites, command and control systems, aerial management systems, or command and control systems for naval battles. So, once again, Thales is part of the national defense ecosystem. We've been acknowledged by Mrs. Nicolescu and by the Defense Committee. We are constantly being invited to their meetings where we can bring our contribution, because we do have the necessary knowledge and expertise to do so. But behind all that, there are around 800 engineers, young ones. The average age is around 31 years old, who are very much specialized and have expertise to deliver systems in all these projects. I won't go into too much detail. What I would like to tell you, though, is that I'm really proud of what we've managed to achieve. So the strategic security compass identified a series of technologies we intend to develop in the future. One such technology is communication resiliency, especially for satellite communications. In this area, we have a team made up of around 100 people who come up with all kinds of progress that can improve national capabilities in the field of sovereign satellites. So we have space space operations for communication satellites. We have two components here, one being planning and configuring the monitoring of communication systems, and then payload configuration management, which is a system providing the operator with a solution to monitor the payload. Another area we focused on is air traffic management. I'm proud to say that my colleagues are now working on one of the biggest strategic such projects, Sky One, aiming to integrate the civil and military airspace in Australia. It will cover 11% of the world airspace.
După cum vă spuneam, în partea navală,
as for the naval area, the strategic compass adopted at European level after the summit in Versailles showcases a tectonic shift in the European continent's security as a result of the Russian aggression in Ukraine.
Toate proiectele pe care noi le
all the projects that we have currently under development in Romania are developed for European and NATO partners. Moreover, we believe that we are capable to channel this intellectual strength to Romanian projects by improving the dialogue between the Ministry of Defense, the Economy Ministry, and the defense industry. I see colleagues here in the room representing one of the most important companies in the field. So by working together, we can have a national defense industry that will strengthen our resiliency as a country. And not only that, but we are capable to provide jobs to our children, in treating them to stay here and live on in this country. I would like to salute my colleagues from the industry, and I encourage you to march on. Maybe next year we'll be able to present the results of another successful project that we have. So thank you very much, and the very best of luck in future years. Thank you, Cristian. Your presentation has impressed us, just as the previous ones did. We see how successful the work you have done has been. Yes, you're right. Stock taking wouldn't be bad. We should try to see how the 2% investments have translated into reality. The fact that you have a close relationship with the Ministry of Defense and of Economy is essential. Well, but now, dear colleagues, dear guests, the time allocated to our panel is coming to an end. If there are any questions,
Bună ziua, sunt Călin Pantea.
My name is Călin Pantea.
Reprezint Martel,
I represent
o companie
Martel,
privată din industria națională de apărare.
private national defense company. We are one of the 180 companies. We are a young company. We've had 24 years in activity this year. We work in military communications, radar and optronics. I would also like to thank New Strategy Center, who has put the national defense industry on the agenda from the very beginning. In the 7B panel, Mr. Bruno Detres was saying the house is on fire. There's no time for business as usual.
Cred că dacă ne uităm un pic și la ce se întâmplă în războiul din Ucraina și la folosirea sistemelor
what's happening in the Ukrainian war, the use of innovating technologies, no one would have believed would be used in such a way. It is time for us to be more innovative and pragmatic and to act more swiftly. There are 5 years indeed since we've been allocating 2% of the GDP to defense, and I would like to quote what the senator was saying. 2 years ago there was a calculation and we saw that 20% of the 2% go towards endowment, and out of that 8% goes to the national defense industry. So maybe it's time to think about a national park, national basis, allowing us to create real capabilities or capabilities which the Ministry of Defense deem essential for building defense. We have a white charter saying that 2% of 2% will go to research and development. It's around 500 million lei yearly that would go to research on a sectoral basis, but we do not know yet what are the topics of interest and how we do that. In 2013 we've actively taken part in the creation of the National Defense Strategy. We are currently doing the same, so maybe more applied discussion would be useful to see what's to be done right now with what we already have. Our colleagues who have more experience can confirm that a complex system which is already contracted will only be delivered in 18-year time. We are speaking about scalable, sustainable, innovative systems. So maybe we will manage to bring together people from the national defense structures and to have a pragmatic discussion, because right now we have a war near our border. What can we do to support the current situation? Of course, some of the current systems are already obsolete. So let's talk to see what we can do. So, well, it's a more rhetorical question, if you want, if you may, or a sort of comment.
I will answer your observations. Thank you very much. Thank you for your intervention. I will only state that probably today we shouldn't have put out the fire if the messages conveyed in the past, in 2015, while drafting our national defense strategy, didn't have the enemy bear a name, Russia. Together with my colleagues in the EU, we used to say that warmth comes from the south, but the winter or frost comes from the east, from Russia. So the war was not a shock for us, but we would have liked for the messages we used to convey to be heard. Now we in the Parliament are doing what we ought to be doing. We drafted an analysis, we wrote a law draft within the framework of the European directive, and it allows us to help our industry, those branches that one country establishes as part of the national defense strategy. So, what more should be done? I think a partnership should be set up. In this partnership that was introduced in the offset law, we put at the same table the industries and the Parliament, the Ministry of Economy, the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Education, because a country needs human resources, and for Romania, human resources are highly important. We want to keep our brains at home, so you need a human resource. So if we create an offset strategy together with the defense industry and a strategy of AI, this will be a victory for Romania. And it is not only our obligation, but your obligation as representatives of the defense industry to answer our call and come up with solutions to our debate table. So there are many lies, as Mr. Nicolescu said, that draft design the defense strategy, and we need to introduce new technologies as well, such as nanotechnology. So we need to come up with solutions, be ready to fight, and not only put out fires, little fires here and there. And I think Romania has proven times and again that it is a serious discussion partner. Thank you very much, dear panelists. I want to also thank the audience for their attention and the wonderful exchange of information and ideas. Thank you for your presence here and your availability to present your viewpoints. I will conclude by quoting VIIIb that said, "Peace, prepare yourself for war." Thank you.